president of the Democrats of the Red Rocks. I realized I should probably say that every time because we have new speakers and new people. So welcome everyone. It is a beautiful sunny day here in Arizona, and we've been getting a little bit of a breeze, which has been kind of a nice respite from a little bit of the heat. We are recording this meeting. We've already started. So if for some reason you don't want to see your lovely face on the recording, you can always stop your video. The reason we recorded is each of these breakfast recordings are put up on our website. And so if you ever miss one, you can go to our website and see the ones from prior months. When do those start, Shelley? They
go back. I know they're on the website back through the end of like there were like 2 or 3 meetings from last year, but this month, starting February, March, I think starting February, we've been putting them up on our YouTube channel, which is new. So if you go to our YouTube channel, it's Democrats of the Red Rocks, like us and subscribe, and you'll get notified of any new videos that get put up.
And do you have a link on the website for that too, for the YouTube video or website?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll put a link to the YouTube channel up in the chat.
Yeah. So if you missed any prior ones, we've been having really great meetings recently. Please go back and watch them at your leisure. I did want to say that when you get, I'm hoping everyone here, you probably are all on our email list, and we've added a link on our emails so that when you send them to your friends and family, please ask them to subscribe to our email list. You know, we want to get this information out as broadly as possible. So it would be great if you ask them to do it. It's a very simple thing. We can't add them without their permission, so they need to sign up for that. So that'd be great if you can let them know that. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ronnie. She is our membership chair, Ronnie Jill.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our once a month breakfast. And I just wanted to remind people that if you have not renewed your membership for 2021, now is the time. Letters went out, now it's probably almost a month ago, asking people to renew. And just so you know, our membership runs on a calendar year. So even if you joined last July, you still need to renew for 2021. So I really appreciate anyone who has not renewed their dues, or if there's anybody who is not a member and would like to join and support DORR in that way with your dues, we'd really appreciate it. Just go to our website, democratsoftheredrocks.org, and click on the join/renew button, and you just follow the directions. You can either pay online with a credit card, or it tells you to print a membership form and then send it to our post office box. So thanks very much for your support.
Yeah, thanks, Ronnie. And it's a very affordable membership. It's only $25 for a single person and $40 for a family. And that little bit of money does help us to do the things that the initiatives that we think are important to get voters to vote. One of the things that we are doing is we've started a program called the Neighborhood Program. And what that is it's a program where you take the responsibility to reach out to neighbors in your neighborhood, and those households become your households from now through the 2022 election. So we started out with our PCs, with our precinct committee persons first, and we've had a really good response from them. And then we're going to reach out to the rest of our volunteers after we get this program up and running and we've worked out all the kinks. So look for that announcement. It's going to be a great way to get to know all your democratically minded neighbors in your neighborhood, and it helps to have a relationship with those people so that then when it comes time to vote, you can say, hey, did you vote? And they have an increase in voting. So please look for that. Now I'm going to have Frankie tell us about a couple of things that she's involved in.
Hey. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. Just two things. One is I wanted to remind people about the DORR Political Film Group. We meet once a month to discuss documentaries and feature films that have a political tone, message. Last month, we talked about Quo Vadis Aida, and we had as a guest Judge Camille Bibles, who's a federal magistrate judge, who was also a prosecutor at The Hague during the Bosnian genocide trials. So we've been having fascinating conversations. You can find out about the film group and what we're watching on our website. There's always an announcement, as well as on Facebook, thanks to Shelley. Secondly, I want to announce that we have started a letters to the editor writing group, and we're looking for folks who might be interested. You can contact me. I'll put my Gmail in the chat. We're also looking for folks who aren't interested in writing letters, but would be happy to send out a written letter under your name. Mike, I'm going to reach out to you later to see if you can talk to folks in Cottonwood to see if there might be people who would be interested in it as well, so we can increase our impact. So thanks. Good to see everybody.
Thanks, Frankie. And Holly Plug is now going to talk to us about the Independent Redistricting Commission. She's very involved in that.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I am one of the 3 Yavapai County liaisons to the Independent Redistricting Commission, and Sharon Edgar, who's also on the call today, is one of the liaisons from Coconino County. And what we need are people who are willing to comment. We're going to provide during the Redistricting Commission meetings, which are Tuesday from 9 until they're over, which is sometimes noon, sometimes in the afternoon. The comments are open during the meeting and only during the meeting. We will provide you the content for the comments, so you don't have to worry about that, and you don't have to stay and watch the entire commission meeting. But it's really important, and the commissioners acknowledge that they read and respond to the comments. So I have presented to Indivisible of Sedona and gotten a number of volunteers, and will be presenting to after the March Verde Valley on Friday, and hope to get some volunteers from that. I'll put my email address in the chat. I'll be glad to, I'm going to hold a meeting of all the volunteers, so I'll be happy to go through all the details at that point. But this is really important because we can't win elections if our county, state, and federal lines don't allow for competitive districts. And as I like to say, since LD6, which is our legislative district, was created almost 10 years ago, we have never elected a Democrat for either the House or the Senate. And there's a reason why. So redistricting will be with us, the lines that are drawn for the next 10 years. So it's really important that we get competitive districts. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day and a wonderful meeting. And I will be joining you for the meeting as well.
Thanks, Holly. Holly, before you go, could you also talk about the League of Women Voters program that's going to
Yes. The chairwoman of the Redistricting Commission, Dr. Erica Newberg, will be presenting to the League of Women Voters on the 29th of April. So if you can sign up and register, it's no cost. And I'll put that in the chat as well.
Thanks. Yeah, so keep your eyes on the chat. There's all sorts of great stuff up there. I think it was Shelley probably put up there the link to sign up for our email list. So if anybody on this meeting today isn't already signed up, great, easy way to do that. And I don't think Toby is here today. Is that correct? I don't see her. So Toby Friedman has a group, put a group together that is the action group, the action committee. And as you'll learn in the program today, there are a lot of threats that are already out there from the Republican Party that are actually initiating mostly from the state legislators. And because our state legislature is not blue, there's a lot of things that are happening that we need to have a voice in. So I will put the address up in the chat also. It's Action Committee at democratsoftheredrocks.org. If you're interested in getting involved in that, they are still making, right now they're making calls to our state legislators, but there's also federal level information that you will get if you sign up for that, because of course we have to make sure that we communicate with our federal legislators. And luckily we have 2 Democratic senators that we can communicate with. And of course, our Democratic Congressperson, Tom O'Halloran. So they need to hear from us also. So please, if you're not involved already in that, sign up for that, because we have to have our voices heard. It is a time where our democracy is still being threatened. So I think that's it. Let me check my phone, make sure I got everything. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ellen Ferreira. Ellen Ferreira is our program chair, and she's the one that puts these wonderful programs together. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. We have 2 great speakers today on a subject that is of great concern to all of us. The Republican state legislatures in states that have been narrowly won by Joe Biden find themselves in a real dilemma, because they know there was no significant fraud in the 2020 election. And yet, state officials, dozens of courts have certified the election as essentially fraud-free. But these legislators have large numbers of constituents who are still under the spell of a narcissistic sociopath who think that there was fraud. So this big lie sets up an opportunity for the legislators, the Republicans, to appease these deluded Trump base people by addressing a non-existent problem with unneeded fixes, while reaping the side benefit of reducing the number of Democratic votes in the future. They're trying to fix a problem that does not exist. Our speakers today are devoting their careers to the cause of advancing justice, and they are as pained as we all are to see what's happening, especially in the Arizona state legislature, but nationwide. And so our 2 speakers, our first one is Darrell Hill. Darrell is the policy director for the Arizona ACLU. Talk about wearing a lot of hats. Darrell, we are so honored to have you here, because we know you're so busy and there are so many important issues that you follow for the ACLU. In addition to voting rights, Darrell works on civil rights, LGBTQ rights, criminal justice reform, education equity, and police practices, all here for the state of Arizona. He's currently working at the legislatures to stop bills that threaten the voting rights. So we are pleased to have you here, Darrell, and we're interested to hear what you have to say. I think what we'll do today is hear from Darrell, see if there are any questions after he talks, and then our second speaker, Savannah Gribbins from the Declaration for American Democracy, will talk to us, and I'll explain a little bit more about what they do in a little bit. So Darrell, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, and thank you for inviting me, Ellen. Happy to be here and happy to discuss these important issues with your audience and with your members. I apologize. I'm having a little bit of problems with my camera, so I have to switch to my laptop to give this presentation, but we'll see how it goes. So as Ellen mentioned, one of my main roles at the ACLU is to kind of fight against and oppose restrictive voting legislation at the state capitol. I've been with the ACLU for a number of years, but I've been at work at the Capitol for the last 3 sessions. And in each session, we see a kind of protracted battle around voting rights and around the ability of persons of color, of persons with disabilities, to access the voting rolls and to be part of the process. I wanted to do a brief overview of kind of how we got here pre-Trump, and then go into some of the bills that we're seeing at the Arizona legislature this session. So the goals, some of the goals of the ACLU voting rights work overall are to increase voter registration and turnout, to make sure that we're getting as much participation from as wide a variety of people as possible. We want to also reduce racial and class disparities in voting, increase access to the ballot for people with disabilities, people of color, and people who come from low-income communities. In 2013, the Supreme Court ruled or overruled Shelby County versus Holder. That's an important case because it weakened voting rights across the country, and it led to a proliferation of anti-voting measures in not just Arizona, but in states across the country. What Shelby required was that before certain states that have a history of discriminatory laws that impact voting, and Arizona is one of those states, before they implemented any new law or regulation, they had to get pre-clearance from the federal government to ensure that that new law or regulation did not have a discriminatory impact. Since pre-clearance has been struck down, we've seen a proliferation of restrictive voting laws in all the states that have high minority voter turnout. So in the 20 states with the largest shares of minority population, all across the South, Midwest, and Arizona, we have seen restrictive voting laws passed. Of the 11 states with the highest number of African-American voters, 6 have new voting restrictions in place. Of the 12 states with the largest Hispanic population, 7 of those states have new restrictions in place. And 9 of the 13 states previously covered under Section 5, the pre-clearance model of Shelby, have enacted new voting restrictions. Arizona is not immune from that. We over the last couple of years, we've seen restrictions, including a restriction that will prevent persons from counting or persons who are not immediate family members from collecting ballots and taking those ballots and dropping those ballots off, those sealed ballots off into in the voting booth. And currently 2 women in Yuma County are being prosecuted under that law by Attorney General Brnovich. So these excuse me, these laws do have real world impacts, and they could lead to prosecution in Arizona and across the state. A couple of those laws that we are now kind of battling at the Arizona legislature include one, probably the biggest law, the law that's gotten the most media coverage outside of the audit, which I can talk about in a second, is SB 1485. SB 1485 would allow, would require election officials to purge voters from the permanent early voter list if they have not participated in a prerequisite amount of elections preceding their vote. So, for instance, if a person hasn't voted in the previous 4 elections, that includes the primary and general elections, they could be purged from their permanent early voter list. So this makes the permanent early voter list the not so permanent early voter list, and really, we think will impact mostly independent voters most harshly, because independent voters are the least likely to participate in primary elections. So, but any voters that are infrequent, young voters, minority voters, voters who tend to vote less frequently than some of our more committed voters, are going to feel the impacts of being removed from the permanent early voter list. And there are already ways that Arizona cleans up its voting rolls. So this is wholly unnecessary and really harmful to Arizona. I think I think when people sign up to the permanent early voter list, they have a certain expectation that they're going to get their ballot, they're going to get their ballot early, they're going to have a chance to review that ballot, and then they'll make a decision on whether or not they want to vote. Not every person votes the same. I'm a frequent voter. I'm sure most of the people here are frequent voters. But some folks, they might not like Trump, they might not like Biden, and they might choose to skip an election. And the way this works is if you sit out a midterm election, if you sat out the 2018 midterm election, and a lot of folks do that, we do see a drop in midterm participation. And if you chose not to participate in the 2020 election because of COVID or because you weren't enamored with one of the candidates, you could be then purged under this new law. So we are very concerned about SB 1485, and that is one step away from the governor's desk. Right now, that bill passed out of the House, passed out of the Senate, and it's now in the House. It's waiting a floor vote at any time. We're one Republican. If you're in this district, Representative Joel John is the only person who's holding out a vote on that bill. So we want to call him and continue to encourage him to oppose SB 1485 and to seek radical amendments so that the permanent early voter list just doesn't lose its permanent structure. Another voting bill that's at our state legislature and folks should be aware of is SB 1713. SB 1713 would require extra documentation for any person to vote early. Under SB 1713, you would have to, so currently the current method to vote early is you get your early ballot and then you put your signature on the ballot to verify who you are. And then county officials, election officials they're trained to be able to match signatures. So they have their signature on file and they use FBI training to be able to match that signature to make sure that person is you. SB 1713 would add an extra step to that. This is a Mesnard bill coming out of the Senate, and it would require voters to either put their driver's license number onto the form or their voter registration number. Previous versions of the bill would have required people to supply a copy of their utility bill or something proving their address, but we've been able to kind of work to amend those even more egregious sections. But we think the bill is still really harmful and impactful to Arizona voters. Over 60,000 voters currently registered in Arizona do not have a driver's license number or a state ID number associated with their voter registrations. So for those persons, the election officials couldn't even verify that the driver's license number that was written on their ballot actually matched. So it would, at a starting point, just disenfranchise those 60,000 voters. We also know that driver's license, persons who have driver's license tend to be lower for persons of color, particularly for indigenous persons. Also for elderly persons, they often don't keep up their driver's license. They don't have a current driver's license. If you move from out of state and you haven't updated your driver's license, you would be disenfranchised, not allowed to vote early. Most people do not have their voter registration number. No, I've never kept that up with that. I don't know what my voter registration number is. So that's not a valid kind of replacement for their driver's license number. And we believe that if this law was put into effect, it would disenfranchise a lot of voters. Yuma County tried this several years ago, and what they found was that voters routinely forgot to include their driver's license number or their voter registration number with their ballot. So a number of votes just did not count. Also problematic with 1713 is that there's no way, so if you fail to put your signature on your ballot, or if the election officials find that you have a mismatched signature, they're required to call you within 5 days of the election and allow you to cure that mismatched signature. Under SB 1713, there's no cure provision. So if you forget to put your driver's license number with your information, there's no one to call you to verify your vote, so your vote just doesn't count. Also incredibly problematic under SB 1713 is a requirement. Well, it would cost the counties a lot of money. Anytime you add another form to the voter registration packet, you're talking about adding millions of additional forms to voting registration. And like one form may only cost a few cents, but that adds up when you're talking about millions of forms. And SB 1713 would cost the counties millions of dollars without any sort of appropriation. So there's no money in the bill that would make up the difference on the cost to election officials. This is particularly important because the governor just signed a bill last week that would prohibit nonprofits and corporations from donating money to counties to kind of make up for gaps in their election administration. That bill, HB 2769, I think is the number, really harms county officials because Pinal County, for instance, relied a lot on private donations to make up shortfalls caused by the pandemic. If those shortfalls were to continue, or if new challenges were to arise, either because of the pandemic or some other situation, county officials will really have their hands tied as far as doing voter outreach, voter education on these new laws that the state officials are seeking to pass. One last law I think we should bring up is SB 1106. SB 1106 is a law that it's kind of an omnibus where it prohibits a lot of different things. Most troubling for us is that it prohibits, there's a provision of the law that makes it a Class 5 felony to assist folks from other states in voting. So we don't know precisely what that means. I don't even think the sponsor of the bill knows precisely what that means. But under the language of the bill, someone could be potentially charged and face a Class 5 felony for going to another state and helping with a voter registration drive. Or if I have family in other states, if I was to help them fill out their ballot, like look up who to vote for, I could be potentially facing a Class 5 felony. So SB 1106 is very poorly written, and we hope that it doesn't move to the governor's desk. I should mention SB 1713 is also one step away from being on the House floor and could be voted on at any time. So SB 1713 and SB 1485, I would say, are our primary concerns. And as Ellen mentioned, and I think other folks mentioned on the call, this all kind of originates from the big lie, the lie that we've seen, first the Trump administration pull, not just in 2020, but starting way back in 2016, when they claimed millions of illegal persons voted or undocumented immigrants voted to depress Trump's win. And that's they used that as an excuse for why he did not win the popular vote in 2016. So we've seen that continuation of the lie turn into the big lie, which was Trump, trying to overturn Trump and certain Arizona election officials, not election officials, but state officials, including Senator Fan, Kelly Ward, the chairman of the Arizona GOP party, and various members of the Arizona GOP caucus, like Senator Borelli, Senator Mesnar, kind of perpetuate these lies with this legislation that they put into place. And that all kind of culminated with this audit that we're all watching in horror be conducted, because it's really, there's no justification for it. And they've, thankfully, we were able to beat back some of the rules that would allow for future audits to take place. But this audit is moving forward, and Senator Fan and Senator Borelli and the folks who are pushing this audit have used just kind of wavering justifications to keep it into place. So the concern is that this is only the tip of the iceberg, that these bills are, no, the Arizona legislature started very quickly after kind of the end of the election season. So these bills were kind of fresh in the legislators' mind, but we've seen a wave of anti-voting legislation in Georgia, Texas, and other parts of the country. And the concern is that in next session, we'll see some of those measures, like we saw passed in Georgia, come to Arizona. So, the ACLU has been working diligently along with our partners to fight against this legislation, and we'll continue to work to fight against this. But it is a challenge, and I think it's important for us to continue to talk to our legislators, whether they're Democratic or Republican, about these bills. I feel that Democratic legislators, if they don't hear from our constituencies, sometimes get the false impression that these bills are okay, or that the public's not alarmed about these bills. That, oftentimes the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And I could tell you that legislators are getting, particularly in the start of session, they were getting 500 emails a day from folks all around the country claiming that the Arizona election had been rigged in favor of President Joe Biden. So this is an ongoing issue, and it will be an ongoing concern in Arizona. And we're really excited to work with groups like the Red Rock Dems to continue to educate folks about these issues and continue to work together to collaborate on how to stop these bad bills, and to really make sure that our election officials are continuing to be, for the most part, they've done a great job. I think they did a great job in 2020, but there are various legislators across the state who are running, some of whom have offer up these bad bills. So we know Michelle Ugenti-Rita, who's the author of SB 1485, and the author of some of these restrictive voting rights bills, is hoping to run for Secretary of State. We know that Mark Fincham, I believe, has already announced that he's running for Secretary of State. If you're not familiar with Mark Fincham, he was at the Capitol on January 6th, the day of the riots, and it has been one of the main proponents of the big lie at the Capitol. So these folks are trying to move into elected office so they can be in charge of our elections. So it's important that we oppose them at the legislature, but be very hyper vigilant to make sure that we're opposing them at the ballot box as well. So that was a very kind of quick kind of summary of what's going on in the Capitol. If folks have any questions, I'm happy to answer anything I can about kind of what's going on at the Capitol and kind of continuing threats that we're seeing down there.
So if you have questions, you can raise your hand or you can put it in the chat. I see that I saw Marilyn Bernhardt first has a question. I see a couple of others. So go ahead, Marilyn. And you're muted. You're all muted. So
I unmuted myself. Yes. Yes, Darrell, thank you. I am asking about SB 1485 as an independent. I'm particularly concerned, and I don't know if you all know this, but in order to vote in the primaries, independents have to change their registration to Democrat or Republican and then change it back after that election is over in order to vote in the primaries. So you're right that it's going to affect us more than others. My question to you is this: if I fail to change my registration and vote in a primary for 2 sequential election cycles, but I do vote in the general election in each of those cycles, would I risk being purged under this bill?
So that's a good question. The independent voters make up about 33 to 35% of the electorate in Arizona. So it's a really big part of the electorate, as equal to Republicans and Democrats. The language of this bill is one of our concerns about the bill is that it leaves too much open to interpretation. Under one reading of the bill, you should not be purged if you voted in just the general election. So if you only vote in the general elections, you should not be purged from the ballot. But let's say you you choose not to vote in 2022 for some reason. This law goes in effect, and for whatever reason you choose not to vote in 2022. It's unclear if under the language of the bill, if they could reach back into previous years. So if they could look at 2020 as well and say, oh, you didn't vote in 2020 as well, so now we can purge you from the ballot. It's not clear if, say you vote in a general election, you voted in the primary election in 2020, say you're a big Bernie Sanders fan, and you voted in the primary in 2020, but Bernie Sanders obviously didn't win, and you decided to sit out the general election in 2020. If you don't vote in the 2022 elections, and then you don't vote in the 2024 primary, it's not clear if you can then be purged. It just says there's 4 consecutive elections, but it doesn't say clearly where that starting point stops and when it should begin. So we think the bill is going to leave a lot of room for interpretation between the counties, which means that a person could be purged in Maricopa County, but be safe in Pima, or vice versa. And it really will depend on kind of the county, how the county recorders interpret the law and how diligent they are about, updating the voter rolls.
Well, I guess my biggest concern is if I vote in every general election, but say I don't vote in any primary elections, will there come a time where I can be purged? Because voting in the primaries is so difficult for independents.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think if you vote in every general election, but I have to be clear about that. If you vote early in every general election, you should be fine. So say you're an independent voter, and you don't vote in 2000. You vote in 2022. You don't vote in the primary, but you show up to the polls in 2022 general election. That doesn't count for the purposes of this bill. You have to vote early. So maybe your ballot gets damaged, your early ballot gets damaged, or for whatever reason you don't want to send in your early ballot and you just show up at the voting polls, at a voting booth, you can still be purged because you didn't vote early. So
Wow.
you have to vote early to remain on the permanent early voter list.
Woo. Thank you.
Yeah, that's crazy, I think. Ronnie, has a question?
Yes, I remember that there was a bill, you didn't mention anything about it, maybe it's not happening, but there was a bill about something where people could question the results of an election, and they can choose the people who are going to recount the votes when they recount them, or something like that. Does that sound familiar to you?
Yes, it's been a long session, but there were a number of kind of extremist bills kind of introduced early in the session. For instance, Representative Bullock, who's in District 20, I believe, up in Phoenix, introduced a bill that would allow the legislature to basically decertify any election result that they suspected was not, and I don't even know what grounds they would have to decertify, but it gave the legislature the power to decertify election results and to appoint electors of their own choosing, if presumably if they disagreed with the choice of the voters. That bill didn't go anywhere, but I think it's a kind of a mirror or a window into the mindset of some of the legislators who are really trying to clamp down on people's right to vote. It's a kind of a dangerous trend to allow for legislators to question the will of the voters. And some of those provisions, and forgive me, I'm not an expert on what was passed in Georgia, but some of those provisions were actually passed in Georgia, which would allow legislators to kind of question the voting, the kind of the election administration in a certain jurisdiction. So not really overturn the will of the voters, but if they don't like how an election was run like currently, like what we're seeing right now in Maricopa County, if they don't like the way the election is run, they could go in and kind of do what they want to kind of, and this is what's scary for us is because of so much of what they're responding to and fueled by is conspiracy theories and lies about the election. It's hard to anticipate kind of what's going to gain traction because so much of this sounds so outlandish to your ears when you think about it. But it could happen. So we have to be on extra guard for it.
Okay, well, good. I'm glad that didn't go anywhere.
Mike Cosentino has his hand.
Hi,
Sorry.
good morning. Sorry. Comment and 2 questions. In Yavapai County, Leslie Hoffman and her predecessors sort of had a rule, not quite, if you didn't vote in 2 general elections, you were placed on an inactive list. But in this case, we're talking about purging people completely from the rolls. Is that's correct? I'm guessing. And number 2,
So-
what are the chances of a
sorry.
veto here? Go ahead.
So to answer your first question, the process of kind of moving voters to the inactive voter roll, that's still in place. So that's a statewide thing. So I don't know the precise language that allows folks to be moved to the inactive, but that's why this whole purging thing is so unnecessary, because there's already a process in place to remove inactive voters from the voting rolls. And I believe you're made inactive not because you don't vote, but because you don't respond. When there's a piece of election mail sent to your address, you don't respond to that. They get a return to sender, then they send something else out to you. And if you don't respond to that, that's when they can make you an inactive voter. Regarding the chances of a veto here, I think that's a good question. The governor indicated, so a number of businesses have come out in opposition to these kind of anti-voting measures, not just in Georgia, but also in Arizona. Greater Phoenix Leadership Group, which includes the president of the Cardinals, Michael Bidwell, wrote a letter to the governor and to the legislators asking them to not move forward with this legislation. In response, the governor kind of said, I'm not beholden to business groups. That's what he said, which is, that's not true in most cases. He's very much beholden to business groups. But in this case, it seemed to signal that he's willing to sign some of these anti-voting bills into law. Right now, I think there's a conversation between the governor's office and some of the leadership on which voting bills he would be willing to sign, so he doesn't have to veto things. So my guess is that the bills that reach his desk will be signed. And if a bill is going to be stopped, it's going to be stopped in the legislature.
Last question is, you talked about FBI system of checking signatures. Is that samples or do they check all signatures on ballots?
And what I mean by FBI system, each election official is trained to check signatures, and they check signatures on every ballot. So every ballot that comes in, they check the signature to make sure it verifies that it's the signature they have on file. If they find that signature is a mismatch, then they call that voter, or they should call that voter and let them know they have a mismatched signature, and they need to either verify that the signature is correct or come down and provide a signature that matches the signature they have on file. So that process takes place generally the 5 days after election, and oftentimes sometimes election results are a little late to be released in Arizona. I should add that if SB 1713 is put into place, it adds an extra verification step to that. So not only will you be checking signatures, you also be checking driver's license numbers and maybe voter registration numbers. If there's a discrepancy in your driver's license number, that vote won't count. If there's a discrepancy in your voter registration number, that vote won't count. And it's going to take longer and more time to check ballots. So all the kind of concerns at the last election about how long it took, election officials to count ballots, those will just be exacerbated because you're adding an extra step to the verification process.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a question in the chat from Marianne. Does the ACLU have a position on SB 1010? Anyone can demand a recount by posting a bond.
We haven't taken an official position on that, so I'm hesitant to comment. I don't believe that bill was moving last I checked. So I can maybe take a pause when the next speaker goes and double check to see where that bill is at. But I don't believe that bill was moving last I checked. So we didn't take a position.
Okay. Holly, you have your hand up?
I do. I just wanted to correct something about voting as an independent. It's only in the presidential preference primary that you actually have to change your registration for a party. Otherwise, if you're an independent and it's a primary for a state office or for even a congressional office, you have to contact the registrar's office, the recorder's office, and indicate whether you want a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot. You don't have to change your registration. Just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and actually, even in a presidential year, for the presidential preference election, when we vote for who we'd like to have nominated as president, in the primary that also exists during that year, you have to request a ballot. So it's even more confusing during presidential years for independents. Did you want to say something about that also?
I'm noticing in the chat a couple of questions about legal challenges. Presently, we don't have any plans to challenge the law, HB 2769. I think that prohibits private donations to election officials. I know some of our partners are looking at that law to see if it's constitutional, but right now we don't have any plans on that. We don't publish any sort of newsletter yet, but I encourage people to follow us on Twitter at ACLU AZ, where we do provide a lot of updates on voting rights legislation, not just voting rights legislation, but all other types of legislation that I'm sure you guys are interested in, including LGBTQ and reproductive freedom legislation as well. And as far as I know, no legal challenges have started under any of the laws, but I know there's a pretty big coalition working in Arizona that includes some national partners who are kind of reviewing the language of some of these laws that have been passed or may pass, and for concerning legal challenges. It's not, states have a lot of latitude to set their own election kind of laws, so it's not always easy to challenge state election laws that, unless we can find that they are purposely discriminatory against a certain population.
Okay, and there's a couple of other questions too, Darrell. Is the ACLU planning to contest the bill the governor just signed prohibiting nonprofits from donating monies to assist counties in carrying out elections?
No present plans right now, but I should have, that's not my department. I'm the policy department, not the legal department, but I don't think there's any current plans. I think folks are looking at that. No, I think the county recorders would have the best standing to challenge that law. So it'll be interesting to see whether the county recorders feel that, that kind of impacts their rights or violates their rights to kind of run elections under state law or federal law.
Sorry.
I say, can we increase poll worker numbers to counterbalance the time-consuming review, slowing down tactics that might be passed. It's really up to election officials to kind of set the criteria for poll workers and to have them trained and be able to monitor them. And that itself is its own kind of costly process. Bringing in volunteers and training them has a cost associated with it itself. So I think that's a kind of a better question for the county election officials if they have capacity to do that, and if that's something they're looking to do in the future.
Okay. And someone asked if they were purged from the voting list in Arizona, how would they know?
So under the law, you're supposed to receive a notice from election officials telling you that you've been purged, and then you would have 30 days to respond to say, I don't want to be purged, and then you would remain on the criminal early voter list. So that's the way the law is currently drafted to work.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out the other one. She talked about the newsletter already. Marianne wants to know if you have any comments on the Maricopa recount.
I have some comments. I don't know if they're fit for public consumption. Yeah, I think the Maricopa County recount really shows the dangers when politicians and our election officials become beholden to a small group of conspiracy theorists who they're trying to constantly please, but this group can't be pleased because their overriding belief is that there was some type of fraud in the election system, and that we've had audits already of the Maricopa County results, independent audits, and now there's this audit by the group Cyber Ninjas, which the name alone doesn't inspire confidence. But this person who runs the company is also who perpetuated the big lie, who's on Twitter previous or during the election saying that Arizona was already stolen. So they come to the situation already with the bias. And I think our big concern with the audit is not that the election results are going to be overturned. President Biden is the president. He's going to remain the president. I think our big concern is that whatever they report to find as part of the audit is going to be used to kind of create new laws that impact the rights of people to vote. So it's hard to predict what they're going to find or what they're going to say they found, because so much of it has been unmoored from reality thus far. So I think that's our biggest concern about the audit. And also there's some voter privacy concerns as well, because the auditors have said that they're going to look at ballots and maybe contact voters to make sure that they voted, that this is consistent with how they voted. And I believe a group by the name of Protect Democracy has already written a letter to the auditors saying that if you contact voters, that raises a lot of privacy concerns, and we potentially violates state and federal law. So a lot of concerns about how that audit is going to be conducted, and what implications it could have for future voting laws in Arizona.
Okay. And then
Joel John is the legislator who's kind of holding out on SB 1485. He's at District 4, which runs from Yuma to some parts of Maricopa County, and that's a purple district. He's replacing a longtime representative by the name of Geraldine Pettin, who was a former Democrat, and his seatmate is a Democrat as well, Charlie Fernandez, who used to be the leader of the House Democrats. So that's a purple district. So he should be responsive to the needs and concerns of Democratic and independent voters.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you so much, Darrell. I'm going to turn it back over to Ellen to thank you, but we really thank you for being here. It was so informative and a bit scary as far as I'm concerned, but it's good to be informed.
Well, thank you guys for having me, and have a great day.
That's awesome. Thank you, Darrell. Feel free to stick around for the second half. The state legislature, as you could hear from all of these things that the bad bills that Darrell was talking about, and there are many, many more around the country, maybe 300. It's almost like whack-a-mole. You just can't keep track of all of them. There's so many things happening in so many states. So there are federal activities going on at the same time, mainly the John Lewis Act and the For the People Act. And Savannah Gribbins is with Declaration for American Democracy. And she's going to talk about the federal perspective on what we could do that would help eliminate all the different problems that are happening in all the different states. So Savannah, why don't you tell us a little bit about Declaration for American Democracy and what that is, the coalition. And we're so pleased to have you here. We really appreciate it. So thank you for joining us. Welcome.
Thanks so much for inviting me here, Ellen. And it's great to be following Darrell. I really loved hearing all about the state voter suppression bills. I think what you just said about the bills being kind of like whack-a-mole is very salient, not just in the sense that they're popping up all over the country. You know, we've had more than 350 voter suppression bills, you know, introduced from coast to coast since the 2020 election. And obviously that is a major problem when we talk about preserving our democracy. But it's not just like whack-a-mole in the sense of the geographic diversity of all these bills, but also in the sense that they're going to keep popping up. You know what I mean? These voter suppression bills, even if, you know, we defeat them at the state level in Arizona this year, they will be reintroduced next year and every year by these Republican legislators who are determined to stop Black, Indigenous, people of color from voting. You know, they're just going to keep popping up until they do pass. And they're kind of counting on a certain level of fatigue in terms of, you know, operatives at the state level. So that's why it's really important that we set national federal standards for voting with bills like the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, which I think the For the People Act is currently designated S1 in the Senate, HR1 in the House, and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act is designated HR4 in the House. So if, you know, in the course of this presentation, I refer to S1 or HR4, just wanted to let you guys know sort of what I'm talking about, because I can get a little bit jargony when I'm getting into the details and the weeds on these bills. So just to start by sort of introducing myself in the Declaration for American Democracy, what I do as an organizer for DFAD, Declaration for American Democracy, is I work with a coalition of more than 200 organizations at the national level and 50 organizations in the state of Arizona, including Fair Fight Action, Planned Parenthood, the League of Women Voters, the League of Conservation Voters, you know, Lucha, Arizona Advocacy Network, CHISPA, all these various great progressive organizations. We all have kind of formed a coalition to focus specifically on passing democracy reform bills and getting big money out of politics, because we know that when it comes to issues like gun control legislation, environmental legislation, dealing with the extractives industry in general, we cannot make any forward progress on that legislation until we get the large moneyed corporate interests out of their, you know, getting them out of these conversations and out of politics. And we really sort of create a government that's not by and for the powerful, but truly by and for the people. So I'll start by sort of introducing the three main sections of the For the People Act, which would be the first bill. You know, it just passed through the Senate. It's in the Senate Rules Committee right now. They had a hearing on March 24th. It is currently going to be entering its markup phase on May 11th, just to let you guys know kind of where it is in the Senate. And the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, we do expect there to be hearings on HR4 in the House, probably in the middle of May or at the end of May. So that's kind of where they are in the Senate. The For the People Act currently in the Senate Rules Committee has three. Oh, and also thank you, Darrell, because I really did appreciate that presentation. It was so informative and great. But the For the People Act has three main sections. Section 1 is on voting rights. Now, these 300 pages were produced by John Lewis's office, and I do want to acknowledge that we stand on his shoulders and that his office and, you know, Congressman Lewis really laid the groundwork for everything in Division A of the bill. The voting rights section of of the bill really includes some incredible reforms that would address a lot of the issues that we're seeing at the state level. So for example, my home state of Florida, we don't have same day registration. You have to wait, you have to be registered for a election 3 weeks before the election actually takes place. I know that it's the same in Arizona. When we talk about things like purging the PIVO list, all of these would be addressed by Division A of the bill, which requires states are not allowed to just arbitrarily purge voting roll lists. They have to clear that with the federal government first. It would create automatic same-day registration nationwide. And it would also address some of the voter suppression that we're seeing in Georgia, where they specifically made voting on Sundays illegal to get rid of the Souls to the Polls events, right? The For the People Act says, no, we are going to have early voting and we're going to have it on weekends. And that's going to be guaranteed by federal law. So it's really important that we see these voting provisions passed. Moving on to sort of the second part of the bill, which is the campaign finance part. This is where we're talking about getting billionaires out of our elections and getting big money out of politics. You've got provisions like the Honest Ads Act, which means that you can't just run advertisements on TV without the people knowing who paid for it. You have to hold digital advertisements to the same standards that television advertisements are held to. We're talking about the Disclose Act, which would require super PACs like the Heritage Action Fund, which has been running advertisement after advertisement on TV against S1. The Heritage Action Fund would have to disclose their donors and be honest about who's funding those efforts, which we do know that it is backed by the Koch operation. And on that note, I'm actually going to drop a really great article from the New Yorker that sort of outlines the opposition that we're seeing to this bill and how big money has already sort of started to organize against the For the People Act because they know that their influence would be greatly reduced in our federal politics if this bill were to pass in its current form. And they're going to do everything they can to stop that from happening. And then finally, the third part of the act is focused on ethics. Now, we sort of sometimes in our mind conflate campaign finance reforms and ethics reforms, but there are a lot of ethical reforms that are greatly needed in our federal government that don't have very much to do with campaign finance. For example, right now, members of Congress are allowed to sit on the boards of the same for-profit companies that they're supposed to be regulating. The For the People Act would make that illegal. Right now, the Supreme Court is not held to a standard of judicial ethics the way other federal judges are. It would create a code of ethics for the judiciary. And I think when we see things like the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh and the hearing of Brett Kavanaugh and all the issues surrounding that nomination, I think we know that a code of ethics for the highest court in the land is something that's really needed in our federal politics. And there's so much more that goes into the ethics, like demanding transparency for White House ethics waivers. We're talking about requiring the president, not by tradition, but by law, to disclose his tax returns so that we know the money interests that the president of the United States has when he or she or they are making decisions for all of us, right? So it's a really great piece of legislation, the For the People Act. I encourage everyone to get involved in advocacy for that bill. And then, of course, our second piece of incredible civil rights legislation that's moving through the federal government right now is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Darrell brought up the Shelby County v. Holder decision in 2013 by the Supreme Court. The John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, named for John Lewis to honor his legacy, is really a reinvigoration of Section 5 of the VRA from 1965 and making sure that we do reinstate those pre-clearance rules for states that we know tend to suppress voters of color, including Georgia. There's been a lot of movement on these bills at the federal level, and I will acknowledge that, the For the People Act, which is currently in the Senate, is co-sponsored by both Senator Kelly and Senator Sinema. However, without some sort of movement on the filibuster, none of these reforms will go through. So it's so important that we get from Senators Kelly and Sinema, not just co-sponsorship of the bill, not just symbolic support and something that they can put on their messaging and brag about to their constituents, oh, I co-sponsored this. It's important that we get a commitment from our Democratic legislators to pass this bill. not just to co-sponsor it, but to pass it and put it on Joe Biden's desk. President Biden has already said that he will sign this bill into law as soon as it is passed the Senate. We need to quickly pass the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act through the Senate, get it to Joe Biden's desk, get these reforms signed into law, and hopefully preserve our democracy for future generations. I know that I realize that I just spoke very fast, but I know that everyone's time is precious and I didn't want to go on for too long, but I'm happy at this point to take any questions that anyone has about what's sort of happening on the national level with S1 and HR 4.
Okay, so we'll do it. Go ahead, Ellen.
Do you detect any support at all from the other side of the aisle?
Unfortunately, no. We have not had any Republican senators say that they support this in public. In private, this is bipartisan legislation. And if you read the article that I dropped in the chat, 80% of Americans support these reforms. The majority of Americans want to see this happen, and Republican senators know that. But unfortunately, Republican leader Mitch McConnell has basically made it very clear to everyone in the Senate that they will not be supporting any voting rights reforms because they do believe the big lie, and they do want to see the voter suppression bills that are, popping up all across the country. They want to see those bills passed, and they don't want to see those bills challenged. So yeah, unfortunately, we haven't had any support from the right side of the aisle. I see, will both bills require a 60% Senate vote to pass? I see that question. As it currently stands, yes. We do not accept that at the Declaration for American Democracy, and no one in our coalition accepts that, right? Because the 60% requirement for the most expansive piece of civil rights legislation since 1965 to require 60 votes and to allow the Senate filibuster to hold that up when we know that Strom Thurmond first utilized the Senate filibuster, almost 50 years ago at this point, or yeah, it's 60 years ago at this point. The fact that he used the Senate filibuster way back then to block civil rights legislation. And guess what? The VRA of 1965, the reason that it passed is because at that time we had a talking filibuster. And Senator Thurmond was required to physically stand on the floor of the Senate to continue his opposition to the VRA. And then it ended up passing the House. We now have a cloture filibuster, right? Where Senate Republicans aren't required to physically stand on the House. They simply signal that they will not be voting on the bill, and the bill is dead in the Senate. And Mitch McConnell has been using that clotured filibuster for almost a decade now to block any significant movement on any bill. And we do need to have some sort of reform on that. And we demand to have some sort of reform on that so that, we can't let these Jim Crow era rules block civil rights legislation. And I personally think it's a little shameful that we would let a stronger filibuster than the filibuster we had in 1965 kill the For the People Act or the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And then I see Julie also had a question. Do you feel Senator Schumer will find a way to maneuver the filibuster so these acts can be passed? I was in a meeting with Senator Schumer less than a month ago, and his office communicated to us that this bill will be passed one way or the other, right? But they can't, Senator Schumer, his office doesn't have any power to pass this legislation, to make any movement in Congress if the people in states like West Virginia and Arizona are not demanding that, right? It's two sides of pressure. Yes, there can be pressure coming from the top, but senators like Senator Kyrsten Sinema and senators like Joe Manchin are not going to make any movement on these issues if they aren't feeling the pressure from their constituents, from their districts. And on that note, I would encourage everyone to pick up the phone, call Kyrsten Sinema's office and ask for her scheduler. Say you want to talk to the scheduler and you want to schedule a constituent meeting with the senator to talk about this bill. And you want to schedule a Zoom meeting with someone from the senator's staff or the senator herself to discuss the For the People Act and the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and make sure that they pass. Is this I assume Peggy meant to say, is this a take it to the streets moment for Arizona? Yes, it is. And I'm so glad that you said that, Peggy. So right now we are planning a national day of mobilization. We are calling it the John Lewis National Day of Action on May 8th, where we have partnered with the Transformative Justice Coalition, who did a ton of amazing work in Georgia around Senator Ossoff and Reverend Senator Warnock's election, right? We have partnered with the Transformative Justice Coalition to basically try to, while still centering it in communities of color, stage a national mobilization on May 8th in favor of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the For the People Act. If you would like to, right now we only have one event being hosted in Arizona, and that's in Phoenix by Mi Familia Vota, but anyone can host an event, anyone can get involved in this National Day of Action on May 8th. So if you're interested in taking to the streets, please email me and I'd be happy to have Corner Democracy be a part of that coalition that's sort of visibly demonstrating and demanding that we pass that. And of course, as I think I mentioned earlier, May 11th is when the For the People Act will be moving to the markup period and the Rules Committee. So May 8th is a significant date because we do want Senators Kelly and Sinema to be feeling the pressure to support this bill and pass this bill as it starts to make its way towards a floor vote in the Senate. Did anyone else have any questions for me?
You can also raise your hand either physically like Holly, or you can use the hand raise on Zoom. Go ahead, Holly.
Senator Sinema has been pretty vocal about where she stands. What about Senator Kelly? He's been quiet. Do we have a perspective on how he's likely to vote?
Senator Kelly, we are having a meeting with him on April 21st with some Arizona stakeholders, but I did just have some student activists who spoke to his office last week. Some of the campus activists from ASU have been really great, really fired up about this legislation, and they said that they got nothing but positive energy from Senator Kelly's office. And one of the reasons I was so excited when Ellen invited me to speak today is that something Senator Kelly mentioned is he doesn't think there's enough awareness in the state of Arizona about the For the People Act specifically. He said he doesn't think people sort of have a name recognition or know what it is. So I'm so pleased to be here in sort of an educational capacity today to kind of inform everyone about the bill. And I hope that everyone here at this meeting feels empowered and feels like they can take ownership of the legislation and educate, your neighbors, your friends, your family about the For the People Act so that we can really, by word of mouth, start to get a lot of buzz around this.
Thank you. It's good to hear we have at least one senator that's Democrat.
Yeah, for sure.
And Senator Sinema, she issued her first ever public statement on the For the People Act last week, saying that she was proud to be a co-sponsor of it and that she does recognize that voter suppression in the state is an issue. And that was a result of, after a day of student activists and activists in Phoenix driving over 200 calls into her office in a day. So she is feeling the pressure, and we are seeing a little bit of movement from her as she feels the pressure. But of course, when we see a little bit of movement from her, that's not the moment to let up on the gas. That means we just need to press down harder because we're almost there. So I'm really optimistic about our ability to move Senator Sinema on this issue.
Oh, thank you. That's very good news.
Yeah. I heard, and I can't remember where, maybe it was at one of our meetings, I think it was Joe Manchin was sponsoring a bill that would require the filibuster to again become what I would call a standing filibuster, where they had to stand on the floor. Has anything happened with that bill? Do you know about that bill?
I don't think there's been any movement on the standing filibuster issue. However, that might be a direction that we go in, right? If we can't abolish the filibuster, we might be talking about reform to a standing filibuster. And I personally would be fine with that because the standing filibuster didn't stop the VRA in 1965, right? Really what we need is to reform the filibuster in such a way that it is not a brick wall blockade to any movement. And, the Working Families Party of Arizona, For Our Future, or Working Families Party of Arizona, we do work with them. The Working Families Party of West Virginia, some unions in West Virginia are really driving calls and energy into Joe Manchin's office on the filibuster. So I hope that everyone here takes heart from that and knows that as we, engage in our activism on the grassroots level in Arizona, there are people doing the exact same thing in West Virginia, and these sort of parallel efforts are going to hopefully, result in some movement from Senators Manchin and Sinema. And I see there's a
Yeah,
question.
and I was just going to say, it seems like that would be something that would be easier to get Sinema to support, and Manchin also, obviously. So that's
Absolutely.
the direction we need to go.
Yeah. And I think definitely, some of the communication that's come out of Senator Sinema's office, right? Because often when I send activists to ask for a meeting with her office, maybe she doesn't grant the meeting request, but there will be sort of a long written letter about her position on the issue. And then we go back and we analyze those letters, trying to sort of glean any sort of information we can. And she's really been emphasizing the importance of tradition in her mind. And the filibuster is a Senate tradition. So that's why it must be preserved. It's been going on for hundreds of years, et cetera, right? Well, if you think about it, a return to a standing filibuster or a talking filibuster is a return to tradition. The cloture filibuster is not traditional. It's something that was introduced in the last few decades, and even President Biden made a comment to that effect. I think he said on CBS, maybe he had an interview on CBS where he kind of made the comment of, when I was a senator, it was a talking filibuster. And I think that was the appropriate method rather than having this sort of cloture filibuster where, any handful of 40 senators can kill really popular legislation. And I also see a question from Michael in the chat. How effective is bot 50409? Compacting and impacting our Senate reps. I would say that the best way to contact a Senate representative is to call their office, their district office directly, ask to speak to their scheduler. Like, say I would like to speak to Senator Kelly's scheduler and ask to schedule a virtual meeting with the senator. You will not often get a meeting with the senator. Oftentimes they send a member of staff. So it would be the legislative directors, their state operations directors, someone like that. But constituent meetings, especially if you can get the senator on a phone call and actually talk to them face to face, are so powerful. I tell people one constituent meeting is worth 1,000 calls, 1,000 texts, because they really are impacted by hearing your personal story in person. Something about the power of the just human interaction has been really impactful on these senators. So I would encourage everyone to sort of try and reach out that way.
That's great. That's great. But I think for some of us, it feels a little presumptuous to schedule an individual meeting with the senator. I know I can change. Yeah, I can see the change in your look here. What do you mean? Of course you can do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, not at all. Because think about it. Who pays their salary? You do. Out of your check, you pay their salary with taxes. You are the boss. I think we have this sort of conceptualization of, well, I'm not the executive director of a national organization. I'm not, a Chevron lobbyist.
Exactly.
I'm not an Exxon lobbyist. So I don't deserve my senator's time, or they have better things to do. That is just not true. And that is sort of, maybe that's the message that's been handed down from Washington and the Beltway. But I personally just really believe that that's not true, and that the senators should be prioritizing their constituents who live in the state and who are affected by the decisions they make over Beltway lobbyists every single time. And I would have no problem saying that to Aaron Lunsford, who is the scheduler for Senator Sinema. But if you don't feel comfortable meeting with the senator on your own.
Fine. I'm good. I'm fine. I'm good. I can do that.
Well, you can always get a friend too, someone in the community. I think there's also value in demonstrating large support. So if everyone, for example, on this call wanted to schedule a meeting together, that's totally possible. But you definitely deserve to have your senator's time every single time. I think
Democrats of the Red Rocks raised a lot of money for both of these senators, and we have some power, I would think. Sedona in general has raised a lot of money and does a lot of work.
there you go, right? So literally, who's paying their checks? Who's paying for their yard signs? You are. And you deserve to at least have 20 minutes of their time, to discuss legislation that you think is important.
Yeah, and just so you know, Cinema knows us because she actually spoke before our group. It was quite a number of years ago, but she came a number of times before she started requiring large sums of money to do that. But she knows who we are.
And that's incredible. I mean, I think that's something I would even say when I reach out to the office, right? Like I remember when Senator Sinema, then maybe Congresswoman Sinema, spoke to us in 2019 or whatever it was. We really supported her then. And, it doesn't have to be a confrontational ask. You can say, like, we still support her now. We're happy that she's co-sponsoring the legislation. Now we want to have a discussion about what she's going to do to make sure that it gets passed. There's a way to emphasize the passage of the legislation in sort of a diplomatic way, while still being very firm, right, in our position that this can't just be a messaging bill. This can't just be a symbolic bill. We do need to see these reforms passed at the national level. And Linda, I saw that you asked if this would only cover national elections and not state elections. So states would still have lots and lots of power to run their own elections. However, this would sort of affect state elections in the sense that super PACs from the national level, like Heritage Action Fund, like others, would not be able to come into state elections and just dump anonymous money into them, right? So it would sort of limit their ability to spend and to run advertisement after advertisement in state elections. But as far as how the elections are administered, nothing much would be changed.
Okay, anybody else want to raise your hands if you have a question? I'm looking through the screens. Peggy, I see, has her hand up.
Oh, I just wanted to see if you think Cinema would be responsive to the thought process of how much grassroots people in Sedona worked to do the Pebble, to get people specifically to be on the mail-in ballots, and told people this was a permanent access for them to be mailed these ballots, and that we convinced a lot of people that voting was really important and how they need to be. I mean, a lot of the people that felt like, it didn't matter. So, I mean, Cinema should know that we were working on that tradition, that foundation of the value of voting and everyone that we could possibly get pulled in to vote. And sometimes they wouldn't vote for a Democrat. Maybe we were registering people. So what does she want?
I mean, I think that's a very salient point. If I could just take everything that you just said and maybe put you in front of her legislative director, like that's the exact kind of talking point that you need to raise in these meetings. Because I think that, for Senator Sinema as an organizer, I organize tons of different states, right? And I always try to think in terms of, for these Senate offices, like what is the narrative that they're going to run with for their national tours and their national talking points, right? And I think for Senator Sinema, what I've been trying to communicate to her office, if there is an opportunity, I definitely think that when she did her thumbs down on $15 minimum wage moment, she kind of was made a villain in national media, right? And there is an opportunity for her to be the hero in Arizona, for her to ride in on her white horse and tell all these state legislators who are passing these, Peevil purges and who are, passing bills like 1713 and 1485. She gets to ride in, from the federal level and basically put a stop to it and protect the voting rights of a lot of her own voters and the people who supported her and got her into office. So yeah, I think your head's in the right place there for sure.
Yeah, and I also wanted to say that in 2022, Kristen Sinema is up for election. And so these voter suppression laws will directly affect her ability to get reelected as our state senator, as will what she does in office now. So I think that's a very powerful point also to keep.
Kathy,
in-
she's not up from 2022.
Oh, that's Kelly. Okay.
That's Kelly,
2024.
right.
And I definitely think that part of Kelly's enthusiasm for this bill comes from a very real acknowledgement that his reelection will, sink or swim by the passage of the For the People Act. Like, I think that part of Kelly's enthusiasm comes from that knowledge.
Yeah, right.
Oh,
So-
thank you so much, Carol. That is such a wonderful thing to say. I mean, I am just one of hundreds of young activists in the state and across the nation who are trying to push for this bill to be passed. And I definitely have to say, March for Our Lives Arizona, in terms of youth turnout and youth involvement, they've been such a wonderful partner and so great. Yes, Linda, do remind her of the turnout numbers, right? We remember voting for you guys in 2018, and we're not going to do it again if you don't pass this bill, or if she's not at least receptive for her constituents. Like I said earlier, I really do believe that they're public servants, right? They serve us, the people, and I think that maybe we need to remind them of that sort of dynamic, right? We're not here to cater to you. You're my representative, so you kind of are here for me.
Great. So I'm going to thank you, Savannah, so much for being here. It was so informative. I learned a lot about the issues, especially the part about asking for a constituent meeting. That's something that we have never done, to my knowledge. Well, since I've been president anyway, or since I've been involved with Democrats of the Red Rocks, we have not done that. And we're going to go forward with that idea. So anybody that's on the call today, make sure that you watch your emails and again, share them with other people so we can enlarge our email list, and we'll send out an email once we get that set up so that you can join that Zoom meeting if you'd like to. We'll try to get as many people as possible. And of course you can do it yourself too. I think that's such a great idea. So thank you so much for being
here. That's incredible to hear. And I mean, speaking to all of you and seeing this amazing event that you put on today, this great breakfast, really, reinvigorates me, because, it does come from the grassroots, from people like you kind of on the ground doing this work every day in your community. So I appreciate you guys so much. And thank you so much to Ellen for inviting me. I'm going to hop off now because
I did want to say, if there's other things that you come across your desk that it would be great for us to know about ahead of time, like the call to action on May 8th. You have Ellen's email now. She's on our board, obviously, and please send it to us and we'll get it out to our email list. And there's also a large email list in Cottonwood too. We'll make sure it gets onto every email list that we know about.
Absolutely. Ellen, I will have a long email for you later today with some details on the John Lewis event and also on setting up that meeting. So sorry about that, Ellen. I'm about to flood your inbox with documents, but
That's okay. There's nothing else in it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I do have to hop now, but thank you so much for having me.
Bye, Savannah. Thank you so much for being here.
Bye-bye.
So thank you to everyone for being here. I do want to emphasize, if you want to get more involved with the legislation at the federal level, please let Toby know at Action Committee. The email is actioncommittee@democratsoftheredrocks.org, and you can get information every single week about what's happening at the federal level as well as the state level. So anything else for the good of the cause from anyone before we sign off?
I just wanted to say that when I was a reporter in Sedona in 2006, and I called John McCain's office and the Democrat, I called it Democratic Senator Dennis DeConcini within the same week. The aides just handed the phones to the senators, and as a reporter, that was very cool. I had no expectation of speaking to the senators. And they simply said, "You want to talk?" And boom, and they just handed the phone or hit a button and transfer the call. So, I mean, I know what she was saying. I was sort of playing devil's advocate there, but just a
Well, you
big
must
moment in
have
my
Irish
life.
luck because I've never got to talk to the actual
Yeah.
legislator, but use it for
It
sure.
was something.
Okay, anyone else? All right, I think we're done for today. Everyone have a wonderful Thursday, rest of your Thursday, and we'll see you next month on the third Thursday. And watch for our emails and for the announcement about what, Ellen, do we have a definite on what that meeting's going to be? So you could say briefly here before we go.
I've invited Senator Reginald Boulding, who is the minority leader in the House, to come and speak to us. I think the topic will be what's happened with the state legislature, because I believe by that time in May, we should be mostly wrapped up, if not completely wrapped up. And I think that would be a good topic. Sharon Edgar and Sue Gould have been helping brainstorm with me about ideas, and we all thought that would be a good one for May.
That'll be great. And that will be on May 20th. That is the third Thursday.
No, I don't think it is May 20th. I think it's the 18th.
Not?
Let me see. Let me check.
I'm looking at my calendar,
Oh, you are? Okay.
but you can check to make sure.
Yeah, it is the 20th.
Yeah, May 20th at 10 a.m. Okay.
Okay,
Thanks,
great.
Ellen. It was a great meeting. Nice
Okay.
seeing
thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.